Well, this is All Saints Sunday, and we will in a few moments remember the saints who've gone before us. And yet our readings are sort of an interesting collection. I'm not sure if they're fitting or not. We have Isaiah's passage where God says to God's people, basically, I hate your religion. I hate your religion. Your religion isn't doing anything for you because it doesn't result in an amended life. Paul writes to the Thessalonians commending their faith that is founded by hardship. Hardly the kind of thing that we'd like to hear. And then we read the story of Zacchaeus, the story of an amended life because of the transforming power of the presence of Christ. Zacchaeus is well known in his hometown, Jericho, because he's the chief tax collector. And Zacchaeus has heard that Jesus is going to be coming by, and so he's determined to see him when he passes through Jericho. But there's a bit of a problem, is that Zacchaeus is a wee man. Anybody remember the song, a wee little man was he? I don't know if we teach that to the kids anymore. Do the girls know that song? Zacchaeus was, we got to redeem their childhood yet by teaching them that song. He was a short guy, and therefore, he decided to climb a tree for a better vantage point, and in climbing the tree, Jesus stops there in front of the tree, looks up and sees Zacchaeus, and seems to know his name, and he says, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down. I must stay at your house today. First, for those who are taking notes, Jesus notices and comes to us when we seek him. How's that? Jesus notices and comes to us when we seek him. But Jesus and Zacchaeus aren't the only characters in this story, are they? Also present were the residents of Jericho, and they are really happy that this guy has gotten Jesus to come to his house, aren't they? No, they're still the troubling homeowners association. They grumble away. Luke tells us that all the people saw this, and they began to mutter or grumble to themselves, Jesus has gone to the home of a sinner. That kind of person, those people. It's interesting that the stories of Jesus' wondering acts of grace are almost always accompanied by a chorus of self-righteous people who grumble about that grace being poured out for someone that's undeserving. The brilliant thinker C.S. Lewis once dealt with the tendency of people to be self-righteous. In one of his books, he wrote that religious people are most scandalized by sins of the flesh. These are sins involving the body, such as adultery, assault, drunkenness, murder. Jesus, however, was most scandalized by sins of the spirit. The sins of the flesh are bad, but they are the least bad of all sins, said Lewis. All the worst pleasures are purely spiritual. The pleasure of putting other people in the wrong, of bossing and patronizing, the pleasures of power, the pleasures of hatred. That's why, according to Lewis, a cold, self-righteous prig who goes regularly to church may be far nearer to hell than a prostitute. That's pretty strong language, I think, but it also seems accurately to present the attitude that Jesus has today toward the self-righteous and judgmental people who are encountering Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, Jesus says, is yet a son of Abraham, a child of God. And notwithstanding the judgment of the good people of Jericho, that's how Jesus sees this man. This is not to say that Zacchaeus was without his blame. As I said earlier, he's a tax collector. He's a Jew, but he's a tax collector. And kind of unlike the hatred that we have for tax collectors, it goes even a little deeper. Tax collectors in those days served Rome, not just the local king. They served the Roman occupying force. So they were seen as collaborators, or even worse, traitors, that they had betrayed their heritage and were traitorous toward their country. They were ostracized, completely cut off from Jewish society, excommunicated from Jewish religion and its privileges, but oftentimes they were very wealthy, and oftentimes they were by means of overcharging, shall we say. They were usually cheats, dishonest and unjust men. Rome set the tax. There was sort of percentage tax of what everybody was to pay, and then these guys could raise that however they saw fit, whatever they saw someone was able to pay. And they also, of course, abused the privilege by taking bribes and marking down payments that weren't actually made if the bribe was effective for the tax collectors. So These weren't folks who were looked upon very well, and they had a reputation that they perhaps deserved, but they were also very wealthy. And it says of Zacchaeus that he's both a chief tax collector, meaning he's like the manager of the place, and that he's rich. He's grown wealthy by whatever practices. It was an affront to law-abiding Jewish folks, an affront to the understanding of Jewish identity and the purity of Jewish faith to have a Jew collaborate with the Romans in such a way. So when Jesus wanted to stay with Zacchaeus, you can imagine the kind of thoughts that were going on in people's mind, probably thoughts that maybe you and I would have if a similar set of circumstances existed in our day and age. Doesn't Jesus seem to know what this guy does for a living? Doesn't Jesus seem to know who this guy is? Doesn't Jesus seem to know how much he has betrayed all of us, including Jesus? And if these self-righteous critics could have only known what was about to happen to Zacchaeus, maybe they would have looked at him differently. At home, Zacchaeus is moved by this gracious presence. This guy who chooses to stay with him and dine with him, the most unlikely of people to be chosen to come to his home and to dine with, because he understands that he's an outcast. And Zacchaeus demonstrates to us what grace does. It changes us. Zacchaeus says, I give 50% of everything I own. I'm going to give it to the poor. Better than a tithe. If I have defrauded anybody, I will pay it back 4 times as much as I have defrauded it. Grace has changed him. Second point. Grace amazed Zacchaeus. I'll summarize it. And now this grace is going to reshape his life. Grace amazes us, and this grace is going to reshape our lives. Imagine if you've ever cheated anyone, repaying it 4 times over. Restitution became a way of life for Zacchaeus after that. Think of the people that he had cheated. Think of how hard that must have been for him to go back. Maybe it was sort of the low-hanging fruit, those who were obvious to him, but then he probably had to scour some books and go back and look into his life and to take account of what he had done and then go back and repay them one by one. How long would it have taken him to track down all those people? How long would it have taken him to financially be able to afford to repay everyone that he had cheated? Because grace was reshaping his life, and this contrition and conversion was pushing forward a different way of living. Some of you remember the name of Mickey Cohen. He's an LA gangster in the late 40s. Remember him in the news? Who supposedly, in a Billy Graham crusade, had been converted to Christ and became a Christian. There was just one problem. After his so-called conversion, Mickey Cohen didn't change his behavior or his mob connections. Edwin Orr, revivalist and historian, was with Billy Graham when Cohen made his alleged conversion, and they confronted him about his lack of apparent repentance. And Cohen responded, well, you didn't tell me I would have to give up my work, racketeering. You didn't tell me that I would have to give up my friends, meaning his gangster cronies. Edwin Orr would later write, Cohen had heard that so-and-so was a Christian cowboy, and that so-and-so was a Christian actress, and that so-and-so was a Christian senator, and he really thought that he could be a Christian gangster. To his credit, Zacchaeus knew better than that and was willing to do better than that as well. Look, Lord, here and now I will give half of my possessions. Now that's half of everything you own. I will give half of everything I own to the poor, and if I have cheated anyone, I will repay them 4 times over. That's a conversion. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. What a beautiful statement of hope for those who are broken of heart or broken of spirit today, those who seem to have lost their way. What a great and beautiful statement. The Son of Man has come to seek and save the lost. Point 3. Jesus came to seek and save the lost. It makes no difference if your home's a mansion or a rescue mission, what your race is or your nationality or your background or your upbringing or what's in your history. It doesn't matter if you're a saint or if you're a sinner. If your heart is empty and you will let him and you climb some kind of tree in order to get a better vantage point in your life, Jesus will come to take you home. It's his promise. Such is the kind of complete change that we see in this Zacchaeus character. Paul Scheer, in describing this story, says that this meeting with Jesus redeemed Zacchaeus' past. It transformed his present, and it redirected his future. That's probably point 4. Meeting Jesus redeems our past, transforms our present, and redirects our future. Somebody's going to have to remember that to help them out. That's a long one. Redeems our past, transforms our present, and redirects our future. Do you know anybody that fits any of those categories? Because of the presence of Christ, their past, whether it was things that they had done or been shaped by tragedy, because of Christ, that past is redeemed and they don't have to live in the shadow of it anymore. There are people in this room like that. There are people in this room who live each day transformed by the presence of God, trying to walk with him daily, trying to climb a sycamore tree, proverbially daily, in order to see a better vision of who they are because of the presence of Christ in their life. There are people in this room who do that. There are people in this room who now know a new direction for their life, a new hope, because the promise of God, God's amazing love, and God's grace has reshaped their destiny and their future. If you just looked around a moment, you would see them. You know them, and I know them, and there's a good chance you're probably one of them. Now, we don't know what happens to Zacchaeus. There's a legend, it's only a legend, is that Zacchaeus would later become the bishop of Caesarea. Whatever became of him, we know that his life was transformed by this experience with a new master. Just as your life and your life and mine can be transformed if we open ourselves and allow Christ to do his work in us. Jesus came to seek and to save the lost. That's good news for us, even those of us who tend to be a little more on the saintly side. But it's also a reminder to us that we shouldn't be too big for our britches standing on the righteous side, to remember that we are here not because we did it ourselves, but because someone saved us, because we will be never good enough for the perfect God, except that Christ comes and takes us home. Jesus came to seek and to save the lives. And if we feel lost today in some way, if there's some broken part of our spirit or some piece of ourselves that is unredeemed or unrepentant or unforgiven, I encourage you, like Zacchaeus, to find a different vantage point, a new way of seeing, and allow Christ to redeem whatever shadowy events of your past there might be that still seem to want to cast shadows into your future. Allow your present to be transformed by Christ by walking with him daily, inviting him in every day, and allow your future to be redirected by the course that he sets. Can you name someone that lived in any of those 3 categories? Past redeemed, present transformed, and a future redirected? And if you can, then you know one of the saints. One of the people that Jesus called to come down from whatever high and lofty place or come up from whatever devastated place that they were, to remind themselves that they too are a child of God and worthy to have Christ's presence. And we remember them today like we remember Zacchaeus. A life transformed, a life marked by amendment and grace, a life of a saint. Amen.